The cold wind rattling the walls of the small cabin promised death if Margaret Norton did not find warmth soon for her children, and she had no idea where her husband had gone or if he would ever return. She pulled the thin blanket tighter around 5-year-old Emma, who shivered despite being pressed between her two brothers. 7-year-old Thomas tried to be brave, his jaw set in determination even as his lips turned blue. Little Henry, barely 3, whimpered softly, too cold even to cry properly. Margaret's own hands trembled as she rubbed them together, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air of the cabin. It was December 1883, and the winter had come early to Ogden, Utah. Margaret's husband had left 3 weeks ago, claiming he needed to ride to Salt Lake City for work. He had promised to return within 5 days. That promise, like so many others he had made, had proven to be a lie. The truth settled into her bones colder than the winter air. James Norton had abandoned them. The last of their firewood had burned out 2 days ago. Margaret had broken up one of the chairs to keep the stove going yesterday, but that too was now nothing but ash. She eyed the small table, wondering how long that would last. The children needed food as much as they needed warmth, and their supplies had dwindled to nearly nothing. A small sack of cornmeal sat on the shelf, perhaps enough for 2 more meals if she watered it down. Some dried beans that would take too much precious fuel to cook properly. And that was all. She had tried knocking on neighbors' doors, but the Hendersons had moved away before the first snow, and the Pratts 2 miles down the road had made it clear they had their own problems when she had gone there last week. Mrs. Pratt had given her a small loaf of bread and shut the door with an apologetic but firm expression. Everyone was struggling. No one had extra to share. Margaret looked at her children huddled together and felt her heart crack. She was 24 years old, and she was going to watch her babies freeze to death, because she had trusted a man who had promised her the world and delivered only disappointment and abandonment. James had been charming when they met in Philadelphia 6 years ago, full of dreams about the West and opportunities and building a life together. She had believed him. She had married him at 18, given him 3 children, followed him across the country twice as he chased one failed scheme after another. This cabin was supposed to be their fresh start. James had won it in a card game, of all things, and for once something had gone their way. Or so she had thought. The cabin was small but sturdy, and Ogden was a growing town with the railroad bringing commerce and opportunity. But James could not hold a job, could not stop gambling, could not become the man he kept promising to be, and now he had left them to die. Margaret stood and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. The sky was heavy and gray, promising more snow. Their cabin sat a quarter mile from the edge of town, isolated enough that no one would hear if she screamed for help. She had to make a decision. Break apart the table and buy them another day or two. Then what? Break apart the bed frame, then the door itself. A movement caught her eye. Someone was coming up the path toward the cabin, a dark figure against the white snow. Margaret's heart leaped with hope and then immediately plummeted. James, coming back to explain, to apologize, to tell her it had all been a misunderstanding. But as the figure drew closer, she could see it was not James. This man was taller, broader in the shoulders, and he was leading a horse that pulled some kind of sled loaded with what looked like wood. Margaret stepped back from the window, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was. A woman alone with 3 small children, no husband to protect them, no gun in the house because James had taken their rifle when he left. She positioned herself near the stove, her hand reaching for the iron poker. It was not much of a weapon, but it was all she had. The knock, when it came, was firm but not aggressive. Margaret waited, her heart pounding. The children had gone quiet, sensing their mother's tension. "Madam," a man's voice called through the door. "Madam, my name is Samuel Xavier. I work at the lumber yard in town. Your husband ordered firewood 3 weeks back, paid a deposit but never came to collect it. My boss sent me to deliver it." Margaret's hand tightened on the poker. James had ordered firewood. That did not sound like him. More likely he had made some arrangement he never intended to fulfill, another in a long line of his broken promises and unpaid debts. "Just leave it outside," she called back, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a pause. "Madam, I don't mean to be forward, but I can see your chimney isn't smoking. If you have got wood already, you ought to be burning it on a day like this." Margaret closed her eyes. Of course he had noticed. The lack of smoke from the chimney was as clear a sign of their desperate situation as if she had hung a flag announcing it. "We are managing fine," she lied. Another pause, longer this time. When the man spoke again, his voice was gentler. "Madam, I've got a sled full of good split wood out here. Already paid for, at least partially. It seems a shame for it to sit out in the snow when there are children who could benefit from a warm fire. Would you at least open the door so I can start stacking it on your porch?" Margaret bit her lip. She needed that wood desperately, but inviting a strange man to linger around the cabin seemed dangerous. Still, what choice did she have? Let her children freeze out of fear of what might happen. She opened the door a crack, keeping the poker behind her back, and got her first clear look at Samuel Xavier. He was tall, as she had observed, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair and steady gray eyes. His face was weathered from outdoor work, but there was something kind in his expression. He wore a heavy coat and work gloves, and his boots were thick with snow. "Thank you," she said stiffly. "You can stack it there." She pointed to the side of the small porch. Samuel touched the brim of his hat and turned to his work. Margaret watched through the crack in the door as he made trip after trip from the sled to the porch, stacking the split logs with practiced efficiency. It was good wood. She could see that even from a distance. Dry and well cut. It would burn hot and long, enough to last them weeks if they were careful. As he worked, she studied him. He moved with the easy competence of someone used to physical labor, but there was nothing threatening in his demeanor. He did not try to peek through the windows or force conversation. He simply did the work he had come to do. Emma coughed behind her, a rattling sound that sent a spike of terror through Margaret's heart. The little girl had been fighting a cold for a week, and without heat, it was getting worse. Margaret made a decision. "Mr. Xavier," she called out when he was nearly finished. He paused, a log in his arms, and looked at her. "Yes, madam, would you? Could you bring some of that inside and help me get the stove going? I am afraid I am not very practiced at it." It was a lie. She knew how to work the stove perfectly well. But it gave him a reason to help, a way for her to accept assistance without admitting just how dire their situation was. Something flickered in Samuel's eyes. Understanding, perhaps. He knew she was lying, but he was kind enough not to say so. "Of course, madam. Happy to help." Margaret opened the door wider and stepped back, still keeping the poker within reach but no longer holding it. Samuel brought in an armload of wood, his boots leaving melting snow on the floor. His eyes swept the cabin, taking in the broken chair by the stove, the children huddled under their insufficient blanket, the near-empty shelves. She saw his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. He set about building a fire with quick efficiency, arranging the wood in the stove, using some bark and small kindling to get it started. Within minutes, flames were crackling and Margaret felt the first whisper of warmth. It was like a miracle. The children stirred, drawn by the promise of heat. "Thank you," Margaret said quietly. "What do we owe you for the rest of the payment?" Samuel stood and dusted off his hands. He looked at her directly, and she saw compassion in his eyes that made her want to cry. "Your husband paid in full," he said. "The whole cord delivered. He was quite insistent about making sure you and the children would be warm." It was a lie. A transparent, kind-hearted lie, and they both knew it. Margaret's throat tightened. "That is very generous," she managed to say. Samuel nodded. He seemed to hesitate, then said carefully, "I noticed your woodpile is pretty low. Sometimes when we have extra scraps at the yard, pieces too small to sell but too good to waste, I haul them around to folks who can use them. Would you mind if I brought some by now and then?" "I cannot pay you," Margaret said, her pride warring with her desperation. "No payment needed," Samuel replied. "Like I said, it is just scraps. Otherwise they go to waste. Seems foolish when there are folks who could use them." Margaret looked at her children, who were already gravitating toward the stove, their faces hopeful for the first time in days. She looked back at Samuel Xavier, this stranger who was offering them a lifeline. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you." Samuel nodded again and moved toward the door. As he reached it, he paused and turned back. "Madam, if you do not mind my asking, when do you expect your husband back?" The question hung in the cold air. Margaret could lie again, preserve her dignity, pretend that James was simply delayed and would return any day. But what was the point? Samuel Xavier had already seen through her earlier lies. He knew they were in trouble. "I do not know," she said quietly. "He left 3 weeks ago. He said he would be back in 5 days. Samuel's expression darkened, but his voice remained gentle. "I see. Well, madam, if you or the children need anything, the lumber yard is right on Main Street. You can send word or come by yourself. We are there 6 days a week." "Thank you, Mr. Xavier." "Samuel," he said. "Just Samuel." "Margaret," she replied after a moment. "Margaret Norton, Mrs. Norton." He touched his hat brim again. "I will bring those scraps by in a few days. Make sure this wood lasts. Burn it steady but not too hot, and bank the coals at night. It should see you through a good while." After he left, Margaret sat by the warming stove with her children clustered around her and cried. Not from despair this time, but from overwhelming relief and the kindness of a stranger who had seen their need and helped without judgment or expectation. 3 days later, Samuel returned with another load of wood. Margaret had been rationing the first load carefully, but it was disappearing faster than she hoped. Winter did not forgive, and the cabin had gaps in the walls that let in drafts. She had stuffed them with rags, but it helped only so much. This time, she invited him in more readily. He brought the wood inside, stacked it neatly by the stove, and accepted the cup of weak coffee she offered. It was the least she could do, even though their coffee supply was nearly as depleted as everything else. "How are the children?" Samuel asked, warming his hands on the tin cup. "Better, thank you. The warmth has helped Emma's cough." It was true. With the fire going regularly, Emma's rattling cough had eased, though she was still pale and thin. Samuel nodded. His eyes drifted to the shelf where the meager supplies sat. Margaret felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she raised her chin. She would not apologize for being poor. Life had dealt her a difficult hand, but she had played it as best she could. "Mrs. Norton," Samuel said carefully, "I hope you will not take offense, but there is a family in town, the Mitchells. Good people. They run a boarding house and always need help with cooking and cleaning. Mrs. Mitchell mentioned just yesterday that she is looking for someone reliable. It would be daily work, and she provides lunch. The pay is not much, but it is steady." Margaret's first instinct was to refuse. She could not leave her children alone all day. But before she could speak, Samuel continued. "She also said whoever she hires could bring children if needed. She has got a big kitchen with a warm stove, and the children could play in the back room while you work. She is a grandmother herself. She likes having young ones around. Margaret stared at him. "Why are you doing this? Helping us?" Samuel took a sip of his coffee, considering his words. "My mother raised me alone," he said finally. "My father died when I was 6. It was hard. People helped us. Some out of kindness, some because they knew what it was like to struggle. I remember what it meant to us, those people who helped. I remember their names and faces even now. I guess I figure if I can be that person for someone else, I should be." There was a sincerity in his voice that made Margaret's eyes sting. "I will go see Mrs. Mitchell tomorrow," she said. "Thank you, Samuel." He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his face. He was handsome, she realized with a start. Not in the flashy way James had been handsome, all charm and easy grins, but in a steady, solid way that spoke of reliability and strength. "Good," he said. "She is a fair woman. She will treat you right." As Samuel stood to leave, Thomas tugged on his coat sleeve. "Mister," the boy said, "are you coming back?" Samuel crouched down to Thomas's level. "Would you like me to?" Thomas nodded seriously. "Mama is sad when there is no wood, and Emma coughs." "Then I will come back," Samuel promised. "I will make sure you have wood." After he left, Margaret sat down heavily. She should have been relieved. Help had come in the form of this kind cowboy who worked at the lumber yard. But instead, she felt a confusing mix of gratitude and fear. She had trusted James completely, had believed in him utterly, and he had abandoned them. How could she trust another man, even one who seemed as genuinely kind as Samuel Xavier? She looked at her children, though, and knew she had no choice. Trust was a luxury. Survival was a necessity. If Samuel Xavier was offering help, she had to accept it, for their sake if not her own. The next day, Margaret bundled up the children and made the walk into Ogden's center. The town was bustling despite the cold, with wagons and horses on the streets and people hurrying about their business. The railroad had made Ogden an important junction, and it showed in the prosperity of the main street businesses. The Mitchell boarding house was a large, well-maintained building painted white with blue trim. Margaret climbed the steps with her children trailing behind her, their breaths forming clouds in the cold air. She knocked, and a plump woman with gray hair and kind eyes answered. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Margaret asked. "My name is Margaret Norton. Samuel Xavier suggested I come speak with you about work." Mrs. Mitchell's face brightened. "Oh yes, Samuel mentioned you might come by. Come in, all of you. It is too cold to stand talking on the porch." The interior of the boarding house was warm and welcoming, with the smell of baking bread filling the air. Margaret's stomach growled audibly, and she flushed with embarrassment. "When did you last eat, dear?" Mrs. Mitchell asked bluntly. "This morning," Margaret said, which was technically true. She had given the children the last of the cornmeal porridge. She herself had eaten nothing. "Sit down," Mrs. Mitchell commanded. "All of you. I just pulled bread from the oven and there is stew on the stove." "Mrs. Mitchell, I came to discuss work, not to beg for charity," Margaret said, trying to maintain her dignity. "And we will discuss work," Mrs. Mitchell replied firmly. "Over a meal. I am not about to negotiate with a woman who is half-starved. It would not be Christian, and it would not be fair." "Now sit." Margaret sat. The children needed no further encouragement. They climbed onto the chairs at the large kitchen table, their eyes wide at the sight of the food Mrs. Mitchell was ladling into bowls. The stew was rich with beef and vegetables, and the bread was fresh and slathered with butter. Margaret tried to eat slowly, to set a good example for the children, but it was difficult. She could not remember the last time she had tasted anything so delicious. Emma ate with more enthusiasm than she had shown in weeks, and even little Henry managed to put away a full bowl. As they ate, Mrs. Mitchell explained the job. She needed help with cooking and cleaning 6 days a week. Sunday being the only day off. The hours would be roughly 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. The pay was 40 cents a day, plus lunch for Margaret and the children. It was not much, but it was steady, and as Samuel had said, she could bring the children with her. "They can play in the back room, Mrs. Mitchell said, gesturing to a door off the kitchen. "I have some old toys from when my grandchildren were small, and they will be warm and fed. That matters this time of year." "When can I start?" Margaret asked. "Tomorrow, if you are ready." Margaret nodded. "I am ready. Thank you, Mrs. Mitchell. You do not know what this means to us." Mrs. Mitchell reached across the table and patted Margaret's hand. "I know exactly what it means, dear. I was once a young mother in a difficult situation myself. We women have to look out for each other. The men certainly do not always do it." There was a story there, Margaret sensed, but she did not pry. Instead, she helped Mrs. Mitchell clean up the dishes, getting a feel for the kitchen and its organization. The boarding house had 6 rooms upstairs, all currently rented to railroad workers and traveling businessmen. It was Mrs. Mitchell's husband's business originally, but he had passed 5 years ago, and she had been running it alone ever since. "It is too much for one woman," Mrs. Mitchell admitted. "I have been managing, but just barely. Having help will be a blessing." As Margaret and the children walked back to their cabin that afternoon, Margaret felt something she had not felt in weeks: hope. She had work. They would have food and warmth. It was not the life she had dreamed of when she married James, but it was survival, and right now survival felt like victory. Samuel came by 2 days later with another load of wood. This time he also brought a burlap sack that he set on the table. "What is this?" Margaret asked. "Potatoes," Samuel said. "We had extra at the boarding house where I stay. Mrs. Chen always cooks too much. She sent these along." Margaret looked at him skeptically. "Samuel, you do not board at Mrs. Mitchell's place." He met her gaze steadily. "No, madam, I do not. So you bought these. Does it matter where they came from if they keep your children fed?" Margaret felt tears prick her eyes again. She seemed to cry so easily these days, when before James left she had prided herself on her strength. "You do not have to do this," she whispered. "I know," Samuel said simply. "But I want to. Margaret, you are working hard and trying to provide for your children. There is no shame in accepting help while you get on your feet." "Why?" she asked again. "Why do you care?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, looking at the children who were playing near the stove with some wooden blocks he had carved and brought on his last visit. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because I have come to care about whether you and these children make it through the winter." There was something in his voice, a warmth that went beyond simple Christian charity. Margaret felt her heart skip in a way it had not in years, not since the early days with James before disappointment had replaced romance. "I do not know when James is coming back," she said quietly. "Or if he is coming back, I think he left us." "I know," Samuel said. "But I am still married to him." "I know that too." They looked at each other, and Margaret saw in Samuel's gray eyes a patience and steadiness that made her want to weep. He was offering friendship, support, nothing more, but there was a promise in his gaze of something that could become more if circumstances were different. "I should go," Samuel said, "but I will check on you in a few days. Make sure you have enough wood." After he left, Margaret sat at the table with her head in her hands. She was 24 years old with 3 children and an absent husband. She had no right to feel what she was beginning to feel for Samuel Xavier. It was not proper. It was not wise. But she could not help the way her heart lifted when he came to the door, or the way she found herself watching the path for his approach. The weeks passed, and December turned to January. Margaret settled into a routine at the Mitchell boarding house, and the children thrived with regular meals and warmth. Emma's cough disappeared entirely, and color returned to all their faces. Thomas became particularly attached to Samuel, who visited regularly with wood, and occasionally with other supplies he claimed were extras or things people had given him. Margaret knew he was spending his own money on them. She knew it and felt guilty about it, but she also knew that without his help they would not have made it. The 40 cents a day she earned from Mrs. Mitchell was enough for basic food supplies, but not enough for the firewood they needed to survive the harsh Utah winter, and certainly not enough for the little extras Samuel brought. Cloth for patching the children's worn clothes, a pair of mittens for Emma, a small bag of peppermint candies that made the children's eyes light up. One evening in late January, Samuel came by after dark, which was unusual. Margaret opened the door to find him standing there with a troubled expression. "Samuel, what is wrong? May I come in?" he asked. She stepped aside and he entered, removing his hat. The children were already asleep, tucked into the bed in the corner under a pile of blankets. Samuel glanced at them, then looked at Margaret. "I heard something today," he said quietly. "About your husband." Margaret's stomach dropped. "Is he dead?" "No, at least I do not think so. A man named Garrett who works at the railroad depot says he saw James Norton in Salt Lake City 3 days ago, playing cards in a saloon. He had a woman with him." The words hit Margaret like physical blows. Not dead, not injured, not trapped somewhere by weather or circumstance. Simply in Salt Lake City, gambling and keeping company with another woman while his wife struggled to keep their children alive. "I see," she said, her voice hollow. "I am sorry," Samuel said. "I thought you should know." "There are legal options, Margaret. Abandonment is grounds for divorce. You do not have to stay tied to a man who has forsaken his responsibilities." Divorce. The word hung in the air, scandalous and necessary. Margaret had been raised to believe marriage was sacred, permanent. But she had also been raised to believe husbands provided for and protected their families. James had done neither. "How long?" she asked. "How long do I have to wait to prove abandonment? A lawyer could tell you for certain, but I think it is a matter of months, not years. And you have witnesses to when he left, and that he has not provided for you or the children since." Margaret walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. Inside, the fire Samuel had helped her build burned warm and steady. Her children slept peacefully, their bellies full, their bodies warm, and none of that was thanks to their father. "I will think about it," she said finally. "Thank you for telling me, Samuel." He moved to stand beside her, close but not touching. "Margaret, I need to be honest with you about something." She looked up at him. In the firelight, his face was all planes and shadows, strong and serious. "I did not seek out information about your husband," Samuel continued, "but when Garrett mentioned seeing him, I pressed for details. Because I needed to know. I needed to know if he was coming back." "Why?" Margaret whispered, though she thought she knew. "Because I have fallen in love with you," Samuel said simply. "And I needed to know if I was a fool for hoping there might someday be a chance for us." Margaret's breath caught. She had suspected, had seen signs in the way Samuel looked at her, the way he found excuses to visit, the care he took with her children. But hearing him say the words aloud was different. "Samuel, I have 3 children," she said. "I have nothing to offer you but obligations and complications." "You have yourself to offer," he replied, "and that is everything I want. Margaret, I know this is not proper timing. I know you are still legally married, and I respect that. I am not asking you for anything you cannot give. But I wanted you to know how I feel. I wanted you to know that when you are free, if you ever want to be free, I will be here. I will stay. I will stay." The words James had never said, never meant. The words that represented everything Margaret had craved in a partner: steadiness, reliability. A promise that actually meant something. "I do not know how I feel," Margaret admitted. "James hurt me, Samuel. He made me believe in a future and then abandoned us to chase whatever selfish whims he had. I trusted him completely, and he betrayed that trust. I am afraid to feel that way about anyone again." "I understand," Samuel said, "and I can wait. I am not James, Margaret. I am a man who keeps his word. If I say I will stay, I will stay. You do not have to decide anything now. I just wanted you to know that you have options. You are not alone." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong. Margaret looked down at their joined hands and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not the sharp pain of betrayal she had felt with James, but something warm and tentative. The beginning of trust. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For the wood and the food and the job at Mrs. Mitchell's. For caring about us when you had no reason to." "I had every reason," Samuel said. "You needed help and I could give it. And then I got to know you and I saw how hard you fight for your children, how strong you are. How could I not care about you?" He squeezed her hand gently and then released it, stepping back. "I should go. It is late. But I meant what I said, Margaret. I will be here. Whenever you need me, for whatever you need, I will stay." After he left, Margaret stood by the fire for a long time, thinking. Samuel Xavier had come into her life at her lowest moment and offered not just physical help but hope. He had asked nothing in return, expected nothing. He had simply seen a need and filled it, day after day, visit after visit. And somewhere along the way, she had started to fall in love with him too. It terrified her. Love had led her astray before, had left her abandoned and struggling. But Samuel was not James. She knew that intellectually, and she was beginning to believe it emotionally. Samuel was steady where James had been flighty. Samuel was generous where James had been selfish. Samuel kept his promises. "I will stay." Those two words rang in her mind as she banked the fire and climbed into bed with her children. Those two words promised a future she had stopped believing in. In February, Margaret took the step of consulting with a lawyer. His office was above the general store on Main Street, and he specialized in property disputes and family matters. Mr. Hutchinson was a thin man with spectacles and a kind but businesslike manner. He listened to Margaret's story without interrupting, taking occasional notes. When she finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "You have a clear case for divorce on grounds of abandonment," he said. "Your husband left in early December with a promise to return in 5 days. It is now mid-February. He has made no attempt to contact you or provide for you and the children. You have witnesses who can attest to his absence and to your circumstances. Additionally, there is evidence he is living in Salt Lake City and has no intention of returning." "How long will it take?" Margaret asked. "If we file immediately, and if your husband does not contest it, which I doubt he will given that he has clearly moved on, we could have a decree within 3 to 4 months. Utah is relatively progressive about such matters compared to some states. 3 to 4 months. By summer, Margaret could be free. The thought was dizzying. "What are your fees?" she asked. Mr. Hutchinson named a price that made Margaret's heart sink. It would take her months to save that much, even working 6 days a week. Seeing her expression, Mr. Hutchinson sighed. "Mrs. Norton, I will be frank. Cases like yours trouble me. A man abandons his family and the woman he left behind has to pay to dissolve the marriage legally. It seems unjust. I am willing to work on a payment plan. You can pay me as you are able and we will file the papers now." "Really?" Margaret felt tears threatening again. "Why would you do that?" "Because I have daughters," Mr. Hutchinson said simply. "And I hope that if they ever found themselves in such circumstances, someone would help them. Consider it my contribution to justice." Margaret left the lawyer's office with the first papers drawn up and signed. In a few weeks, once everything was properly prepared, James would be served with divorce papers. Whether he responded or not, the process would move forward. By summer, she would be free. She walked to the Mitchell boarding house, her head spinning. She was taking control of her life in a way she never had before. She was not waiting for a man to rescue her or to come back or to decide her fate. She was deciding it herself. "You look flushed, Mrs. Mitchell commented when Margaret arrived. "Is everything all right?" Margaret considered hiding the truth, but Mrs. Mitchell had been so kind to her. "I filed for divorce today," she said quietly. "From my husband, the one who abandoned us, Mrs. Mitchell set down the potato she was peeling and wiped her hands on her apron. "Good," she said firmly. "That man does not deserve you or those beautiful children. I am proud of you for having the courage to do it." "It does not feel courageous," Margaret admitted. "It feels terrifying." "Courage usually does," Mrs. Mitchell replied. "But you are doing the right thing. Now let us get to work. These boarders will want their supper on time and we have much to do." The routine of work was comforting. Margaret lost herself in the rhythm of cooking and cleaning, and the hours passed quickly. The children played contentedly in the back room, and at lunch, they all sat down together to eat the meal Margaret had helped prepare. It was a good life, she realized. Simple, but good. Honest work, regular meals, warmth and safety. It was not the grand adventure James had promised, but it was real and sustainable. Samuel came by that evening, as he often did. He brought wood, as always, but also a small cloth bag that he handed to Margaret with a slightly sheepish expression. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside were peppermint sticks, one for each child, and at the bottom a small carved wooden bird. Margaret lifted it out carefully. It was a robin, delicately crafted with tiny details in the wings and beak. "I have been working on it in the evenings," Samuel said. "I thought you might like it. Robins mean spring is coming. Hope." Margaret's throat tightened. "Samuel, it is beautiful, but you do too much for us already. The wood, the food, and now gifts." "I want to," he said. "Margaret, it makes me happy to do things for you and the children. Please do not take that away from me." She looked up at him, this good man who had come into her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. "I filed for divorce today," she said softly. Samuel went very still. "You did? Mr. Hutchinson says it should be final by summer, if James does not contest it, which he almost certainly will not." "How do you feel about that?" Samuel asked carefully. "Scared," Margaret admitted. "Relieved, hopeful, all at once." Samuel took a step closer. "Margaret, I meant what I said before. I love you. And I love your children. I know you need time, and I will give you all the time you need. But I want you to know that my feelings have not changed. If anything, they have grown stronger." Margaret reached out and took his hand, the same gesture he had made to her weeks ago. "I am starting to believe in you," she whispered. "In us. It is hard for me after James, but you make it easier." "That is all I ask," Samuel said. "Just give me a chance to prove that not all men are like your husband. Some of us know how to stay." The children heard Samuel's voice and came running. Thomas launched himself at Samuel's legs, and Emma shyly showed him a drawing she had made. Even little Henry reached up to be picked up. Samuel scooped the boy into his arms easily, and the sight of this big, strong cowboy holding her youngest child with such gentle care made Margaret's heart ache in the best possible way. This was what a father should be. This was what a husband should be. Not James with his empty promises and selfish abandonment, but Samuel with his steady presence and generous heart. They spent the evening together, Samuel playing simple games with the children while Margaret mended clothes by the firelight. It felt domestic and right, like a glimpse of a future that might actually be possible. When Samuel finally left, he kissed Margaret's forehead gently, a chaste gesture that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through her. "Good night, Margaret. I will see you in a few days." "Good night, Samuel." As winter gradually loosened its grip and February turned to March, life began to feel almost normal. Margaret continued working at the boarding house, and Samuel continued his regular visits. The children grew used to his presence, and Thomas in particular began to see him as a father figure, following Samuel around whenever he visited and asking endless questions about the lumber yard and woodworking. In mid-March, papers arrived from Mr. Hutchinson. James had been served with the divorce papers in Salt Lake City. He had not contested. In fact, according to the serving agent, James had seemed almost relieved. He had made no claim to the cabin, the children, or any kind of custody or visitation. He had simply signed the papers acknowledging receipt and gone back to his card game. "He truly does not care," Margaret said to Samuel when she told him the news. They were sitting on the cabin porch, watching the children play in the yard. The snow was melting, revealing patches of brown earth, and the air had lost some of its bitter edge. "He is a fool," Samuel said. "He had everything and threw it away." "Will you think less of me for being divorced?" Margaret asked. "Some people will. Some people will say I failed at my marriage." Samuel turned to face her fully. "Margaret Norton, you did not fail at anything. You married a man who lied to you, and when he abandoned you, you did what you had to do to survive and protect your children. Anyone who judges you for that is not worth your concern. And I certainly do not think less of you. If anything, I admire you more." "I have thought about what happens next," Margaret said carefully. "When the divorce is final, what it might mean for us." Samuel's expression grew intense. "What have you thought?" "That I am afraid. That I want to trust you, but I am scared. That I care about you more than I want to admit." "That is a start," Samuel said. "Margaret, I know I have said this before, but I will say it as many times as you need to hear it. I am not going anywhere. I will be here tomorrow and next week and next month. I will be here when the divorce is final, and I will be here after. You do not have to be afraid of me leaving because I will not. I have made my choice, and my choice is you." Margaret felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were not tears of sadness. "I think I am falling in love with you," she whispered. "Maybe I already have." Samuel reached out and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "Then we will take this slowly at your pace. There is no rush. We have time." But the world, it seemed, had other ideas. A week later, Margaret was at the boarding house when a stranger rode into town. He stopped at the lumber yard looking for Xavier, and when Samuel came out to speak with him, the stranger delivered news that changed everything. Samuel came to the cabin that evening looking shaken. Margaret took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked. "My uncle died," Samuel said. "In California. He had a ranch there, and he left it to me in his will. I am his only living relative." Margaret's stomach dropped. "You have to go to California." "I have to go settle the estate, yes. But Margaret, when do you leave?" "The lawyer says I should come as soon as possible. There are papers to sign, decisions to make about the property. I am sorry. I know the timing is terrible." Margaret turned away, her mind racing. Of course this was happening. She had finally allowed herself to trust, to believe, and now Samuel was leaving. Just like James had left, just like everyone always left. "Margaret, look at me," Samuel said, and there was steel in his voice that made her turn back. "I am coming back, do you hear me? I am going to California to deal with my uncle's estate, and then I am coming back. To you, to the children. This is not me abandoning you." "James said he was coming back too," Margaret said, her voice breaking. Samuel crossed the room in 2 strides and took her shoulders gently. "I am not James. Margaret, I love you. Do you understand? I love you." I am going to go to California, and I am going to settle my uncle's affairs, and then I am coming back here to Ogden to marry you if you will have me. Nothing could keep me away." "People always leave," Margaret whispered. "I will not," Samuel said fiercely. "I will write to you every week. I will send money to make sure you and the children are provided for while I am gone, and I will return. I swear to you on everything I hold sacred, I will return." Margaret wanted to believe him. She wanted it so desperately it hurt. But fear was a powerful thing, and trust once broken was hard to rebuild. "When do you leave?" she asked again. "In 3 days. I need to give notice at the lumber yard and arrange things. Margaret, please, please believe me." She looked into his gray eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and love. "I want to," she said. "I am trying. That is all I ask. Just try." Samuel kept his word about those 3 days. He came by the cabin every evening, and during his last visit he brought gifts for the children and a small bag of coins for Margaret. "This is too much," she protested. "It is exactly enough to see you through until I return," Samuel said. "Take it, please. Let me have the peace of mind of knowing you are provided for." He knelt down and spoke to each child individually, telling them he was going on a trip but would be back. Thomas cried and clung to him, and even Emma's eyes were wet. Samuel hugged them all, his own face strained with emotion. Finally, he stood and faced Margaret. "I will write to you," he said, "every week as I promised, and I will be back by summer. The divorce will be final, and we can start planning our future, our real future together." "You are assuming I will say yes if you ask me to marry you," Margaret said, trying for lightness even though her heart was breaking. "I am hoping," Samuel corrected. "I am hoping you will say yes. Because I love you, Margaret Norton. I love you and your children, and I want to build a life with you." He kissed her then, not on the forehead as he had before, but on the lips, a gentle but unmistakable kiss that tasted of promise and commitment. Margaret kissed him back, letting herself feel all the emotions she had been holding back, fear and hope and love all tangled together. "Come back to me," she whispered against his lips. "I will," Samuel said. "I swear I will." The next morning, Samuel left for California. Margaret watched him ride away on his horse, leading a pack mule with his belongings, until he disappeared over the horizon. Then she went inside the cabin and cried until she had no tears left. The children were subdued for days. They missed Samuel, and no amount of reassurance from Margaret could completely comfort them. She missed him too, with an intensity that surprised her. He had become such a constant presence in their lives that his absence felt like losing a limb. But a week later, true to his word, a letter arrived. The handwriting was careful and precise. "Dear Margaret, I am in Sacramento. The journey was long but uneventful. I think of you and the children constantly. How is Thomas? Has Emma been drawing? Is Henry talking more? Are you keeping warm? Are you eating enough? My uncle's ranch is larger than I expected. He had cattle and some farmland. The lawyer says the estate is worth a considerable sum. I should have everything settled within 6 weeks, and then I will start the journey back to you. I miss you. I miss your smile and the way you brush your hair behind your ear when you are thinking. I miss the children's laughter and the way the cabin smells like wood smoke and coffee. I miss being near you. I will write again soon. Please write back if you can. Knowing I will hear from you makes the distance easier to bear. With all my love." Samuel. Margaret read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and tucked it into her bodice, close to her heart. He had written. He had kept his promise about that, at least. She allowed herself to hope a little. She wrote back that evening after the children were asleep, her handwriting less practiced than his but heartfelt. "Dear Samuel, your letter arrived safely. Thank you for writing. The children miss you. Thomas asks every day when you are coming back. Emma drew you a picture which I am enclosing. Henry has started saying new words, including a version of your name that sounds like Samuel. We are well. Work at the boarding house continues. Mrs. Mitchell asks after you. The divorce papers are moving forward. Mr. Hutchinson says everything should be finalized by late May. I miss you too. More than I expected to. More than I want to admit sometimes because it frightens me how much I have come to depend on you. But I am trying to believe as you asked. I am trying to trust that you will come back. Please be safe. Please hurry. Yours, Margaret. She sent the letter the next day, along with Emma's drawing of a stick-figure man with a large smile. Then she settled into the routine of waiting. More letters came, one each week like clockwork. Samuel wrote about the ranch, about the business of settling the estate, about how he was selling the cattle and most of the land, but keeping a portion that he thought might be useful someday. He wrote about missing her, about counting the days until he could return. Margaret wrote back faithfully, telling him about the children's small triumphs, about work at the boarding house, about the progress of the divorce. She found herself looking forward to his letters with an eagerness that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. In early May, the divorce was finalized. Margaret stood in Mr. Hutchinson's office and held the decree in her hands. She was no longer Mrs. James Norton. She was simply Margaret Norton, a free woman. "Congratulations," Mr. Hutchinson said kindly. "You can start fresh now." Margaret nodded, still staring at the paper. 7 years of marriage, dissolved in a paragraph of legal language. It should have felt momentous, but mostly it felt like relief. She wrote to Samuel that night with the news. His response came faster than usual, as if he had been waiting for it. "Dearest Margaret, I received your letter about the divorce. You are free. This is a new beginning for you and for us. I have finished with the estate. Everything is sold except for a piece of land that I am keeping. I am starting the journey back tomorrow. If all goes well, I should arrive in Ogden by the end of May. Margaret, I love you. I am coming home to you. Please tell the children I am on my way. Forever yours, Samuel." Margaret read the letter with shaking hands. He was coming back. He had said he would, and he was. She wanted to run through the streets shouting it, but instead, she hugged the letter to her chest and allowed herself to truly believe for the first time. Samuel Xavier was coming home. The last week of May felt endless. Margaret found herself walking to the edge of town at the end of each workday, looking down the road that led east, watching for riders. The children caught her eagerness and joined her vigil, Thomas running ahead to check if anyone was coming. "When will he be here, Mama?" Emma asked for what felt like the 100th time. "Soon, sweetheart," Margaret replied. "Very soon." And then, on the last day of May, as the sun was beginning to set, Thomas shouted from his lookout position. "Mama, someone is coming. Is it him? Is it Samuel?" Margaret's heart leaped. She shaded her eyes against the setting sun and saw a lone rider on the horizon, leading a pack mule. Even from a distance, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the way he sat his horse. "It is him," she breathed. Then louder, "It is him." She started walking, then running, her skirts tangled around her legs, not caring how it looked or what anyone thought. Behind her, the children were running too, Thomas in the lead and Emma dragging Henry along by the hand. Samuel saw them and urged his horse into a faster pace. When they met, he dismounted in one fluid motion and caught Margaret in his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. She was laughing and crying at the same time, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "You came back," she said. "You really came back." "I told you I would," Samuel said, setting her down but not letting go. "Did you doubt me?" "A little," she admitted. "At first, but not by the end." The children swarmed them, and Samuel lifted Henry onto his shoulders and took Emma's hand, while Thomas chattered excitedly about everything that had happened in the past 2 months. They walked back to the cabin together, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like a family. At the cabin, Samuel unloaded his belongings while Margaret made coffee. The children showed him everything they had done while he was gone, talking over each other in their eagerness. Samuel listened patiently, giving each child his full attention, and Margaret fell a little more in love with him watching it. Finally, after the children had exhausted themselves and fallen asleep, Samuel and Margaret sat together by the fire. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. "You did," Margaret agreed. "Thank you, for writing, for coming back, for everything." "Margaret Norton," Samuel said, and his voice was serious. He slid off his chair and knelt beside her. "I told you I loved you before I left, and that has not changed. If anything, the distance only made me more certain. You are the woman I want to spend my life with, you and your children. I want to be a husband to you and a father to them. Will you marry me?" Margaret looked down at this good man kneeling before her, offering her everything she had given up hoping for: stability, love, a true partner who would stay through hard times and good. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." Samuel's face broke into a wide smile, and he stood, pulling her up with him and kissing her deeply. It was a kiss full of promise and passion, the kiss of two people who had found each other against the odds and were claiming their future together. "I want to do this properly," Samuel said when they finally broke apart. "I want to court you, take you to dinner, let the town know my intentions. You deserve that." "The town already knows your intentions," Margaret said with a laugh. "You have been visiting me for months, Samuel." "We are not exactly subtle. Still," he insisted, "I want everyone to know that Margaret Norton is going to become Margaret Xavier. I want to marry you in the church with the whole town watching. I want to do this right." And he did. Over the next month, Samuel courted Margaret properly. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, the first time she had eaten somewhere so fancy in years. He walked with her and the children through town on Sundays after church. He came by the boarding house to walk her home after work, carrying Henry on his shoulders while Thomas and Emma skipped ahead. He also began making improvements to the cabin. He fixed the gaps in the walls that let in drafts. He built a proper porch with a railing. He expanded the single room with a small addition, creating a separate bedroom for Margaret that would become their bedroom after the marriage. The children would keep the main room, with new beds Samuel built himself. "You do not have to do all this," Margaret protested, though she was touched by his efforts. "I want our home to be comfortable," Samuel said. "I want you and the children to be happy here." "We are happy," Margaret assured him. "We have been happy since you came into our lives." They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in July. It would be a simple ceremony, but Margaret found she did not mind. She had had a big wedding with James, all show and no substance. This time she wanted something real. Mrs. Mitchell helped her make a new dress, a simple but elegant design in soft blue. Samuel bought a new suit, his first. Thomas would stand with Samuel as his best man, which made the boy swell with pride. Emma and Henry would stand with Margaret. The night before the wedding, Samuel brought Margaret a gift. It was a wooden box, beautifully carved with a scene of mountains and trees. "Open it," he said. Inside was a gold ring, delicate and lovely. Not expensive, Margaret could tell, but chosen with care. "It is beautiful," she breathed. "It belonged to my mother," Samuel said. "She left it to me when she died. She made me promise that I would only give it to a woman I truly loved, a woman who would be a good wife and mother." "Margaret, you are that woman. Would you wear my mother's ring?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I would be honored." The wedding day dawned clear and warm. Margaret dressed carefully in her blue dress, her hair pinned up with a few curls framing her face. Emma had picked wildflowers that morning, and she wove them into a simple crown for Margaret. "You look like a princess, Mama," Emma said. "Thank you, sweetheart." They walked to the church together, Margaret holding Henry's hand and Emma walking beside her. A surprising number of people had gathered. Mrs. Mitchell was there, of course, beaming with pride. Mr. Hutchinson, the lawyer, had come, as had many of the workers from the lumber yard. Even people Margaret barely knew had shown up, drawn by curiosity or goodwill. And there, standing at the front of the church in his new suit, was Samuel. He looked nervous and happy and so handsome that Margaret's breath caught. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his face lit up with such joy that she felt her own answering smile. The ceremony was simple and brief. They spoke their vows clearly, their voices steady. Samuel's hand trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto Margaret's finger, but his eyes never left hers. "I promise to love you and care for you and your children for all my days," he said. "I promise to stay, Margaret, always." "I believe you," Margaret replied. "And I promise to trust you, to love you, to build a life with you. Thank you for not giving up on me." When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Samuel kissed Margaret gently, mindful of their audience. But his kiss held a promise of deeper passion to come, and Margaret felt heat bloom in her cheeks. They walked out of the church together as husband and wife, Thomas and Emma running ahead and Henry clutching Samuel's hand. People threw rice and called out congratulations. Mrs. Mitchell had arranged a small reception at the boarding house, with cake and lemonade for everyone. It was a perfect day, Margaret thought. Simple but full of love and genuine happiness. This was what a wedding should be. Not grand promises destined to be broken, but honest vows between two people who had chosen each other with open eyes and full hearts. That night, after the children were asleep in their new beds in the main room, Samuel and Margaret lay together in their own bedroom for the first time as husband and wife. Samuel was gentle and patient, mindful that it had been a long time since Margaret had been with a man and that her experiences with James had not all been positive. "I love you," he whispered against her skin. "You are everything to me." Margaret gave herself to her husband with a joy and trust she had never felt with James. This was what intimacy should be, she realized. Not an obligation or a transaction, but a genuine sharing between two people who loved each other. Afterward they lay tangled together, Samuel's arms around her and Margaret's head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I cannot believe you are really mine," she said softly. "That this is real." "It is real," Samuel assured her. "You are my wife. Those are my children now if they will have me. This is our life, Margaret, and I am never letting it go." The months that followed were the happiest of Margaret's life. She continued working at the boarding house, though Samuel said she did not have to. But she enjoyed the work and the friendship with Mrs. Mitchell, and the extra income helped them save toward the future. Samuel worked at the lumber yard and took on extra carpentry jobs in the evenings and on Sundays. He was building them a better life, one board at a time. The cabin continued to improve, with Samuel adding small touches that made it more of a home. A mantel above the fireplace where Margaret could display the few treasures she had. Shelves for the children's toys and books. A real table with 4 matching chairs. The children bloomed under Samuel's attention. Thomas became his shadow, learning woodworking and helping with chores. Emma grew more confident and outgoing. Even Henry, who had been so small and fragile during that terrible winter, grew sturdy and strong. In September, Margaret realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited to be certain before telling Samuel. When she finally told him, he picked her up and spun her around just as he had the day he returned from California. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Margaret asked. "I am ecstatic," Samuel replied. "Margaret, I love Thomas and Emma and Henry as if they were my own blood. But the idea of a child that we made together, a child that is part of both of us, fills me with more joy than I can express." He placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I already love you so much." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as they did so often these days. "You are going to be such a good father." "I already am a father," Samuel corrected. "To 3 wonderful children. This baby will make 4. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Margaret felt healthy and strong, and Samuel fussed over her constantly, making sure she did not work too hard and that she ate well. Mrs. Mitchell was thrilled at the news and began knitting baby clothes immediately. Winter came again, but this winter was nothing like the last. The cabin was warm and snug with Samuel's improvements. They had more than enough firewood. Their pantry was full of food that Samuel had bought and Margaret had preserved. Most importantly, they had each other. On a snowy evening in December, almost exactly a year after that terrible winter when Margaret had been abandoned, she and Samuel sat together by the fire while the children slept. Margaret was working on mending while Samuel carved a small rocking horse for the baby. "Do you ever think about James?" Samuel asked quietly. Margaret considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Not often. Usually just to marvel at how foolish he was to leave us." "He could have had all this, Samuel. A warm home, a loving wife, beautiful children. He chose to throw it away." "His loss is my gain," Samuel said. "I thank God every day that I came to your door that winter with firewood. If I had not, I would never have met you. I would never have known what real love feels like." "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked. "Taking on a woman with 3 children and all her problems." Samuel set down his carving and moved to kneel before her chair. He took her hands in his. "Margaret Xavier, I have never regretted a single moment with you. You and the children are the best thing that has ever happened to me. I love our life. I love our family. I love you. Do not ever doubt that." Margaret leaned forward and kissed him. "I love you too. Thank you for staying." "Always," Samuel promised. "I will always stay." In April of 1885, Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him William Samuel Xavier, after both Samuel's father and Samuel himself. He had his father's gray eyes and a head of dark hair, and Samuel was instantly smitten. "He is perfect," Samuel said, holding his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "Margaret, he is absolutely perfect." The older children adored their baby brother. Thomas was protective and serious about his new responsibilities. Emma loved to sing to the baby and help with his care. Even Henry, at 4 years old, was gentle and sweet with the infant. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Margaret eventually stopped working at the boarding house, choosing to stay home with the baby and manage the household. Samuel continued at the lumber yard and took on more carpentry projects. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and secure. Thomas started school and proved to be an excellent student. Emma showed artistic talent, drawing constantly. Henry grew into a cheerful, energetic child who kept everyone entertained. And little William thrived, growing fat and happy in a house full of love. 2 years later, Margaret became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Rose Marie Xavier. She had Margaret's brown eyes and Samuel's dark hair, and she completed their family perfectly. On a warm summer evening in 1888, Samuel and Margaret sat on the porch he had built, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 11 now, tall and responsible, helping Samuel with bigger projects. Emma, 9, was showing Henry and William how to make flower chains. Baby Rose slept in Margaret's arms. "You remember that first winter?" Margaret asked. "When you brought the firewood?" "I remember everything," Samuel said. "I remember seeing you at the door, trying so hard to be strong. I remember the children huddled by the stove. I remember thinking that I had to help, that I could not walk away." "I did not trust you at first," Margaret confessed. "I thought you were too good to be true. I thought you would leave like James did." "I know," Samuel said, "but I am stubborn. I was determined to prove that some men keep their promises." "You proved it," Margaret said softly. "You proved it every day for 4 years now. You are the best husband and father I could have ever imagined." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders, careful not to jostle the sleeping baby. "We have built something good here, haven't we? A real family, a real home." "We have," Margaret agreed. "And to think, it all started because a cowboy showed up with firewood on the worst day of my life." "And said he would stay," Samuel finished. "And actually did," Margaret added, smiling. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains and their children playing in the golden light. The cabin behind them was solid and warm, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. The pantry was full, the woodpile was stacked high, and love filled every corner of their home. Margaret thought back to that terrible winter when she had been abandoned and desperate, when she had thought her life was over. She thought about the moment Samuel had knocked on her door, about his gray eyes full of kindness, about how he had looked at her struggling children and decided to help. She thought about all the times he could have left and did not, all the promises he could have broken and kept, all the moments, large and small, when he had shown her that love was not just words but actions, day after day, year after year. Thomas ran up to the porch, breathless and grinning. "Papa, will you help me with the project we started in the barn?" "Of course," Samuel said, standing. He kissed Margaret's forehead. "I will be back soon." As Margaret watched her husband walk toward the barn with their oldest son, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. She had been given a second chance at love, at family, at happiness. And this time, she had chosen wisely. She had chosen a man who knew how to stay. Baby Rose stirred in her arms and opened her eyes, looking up at Margaret with Samuel's gray gaze. Margaret smiled down at her daughter. "You are lucky, little one," she whispered. "You have a papa who will always be here, a papa who keeps his promises. A papa who loves you more than anything in this world." Emma ran up to the porch. "Mama, Henry says dinner will be ready soon. Can I help set the table?" "Of course, sweetheart. Let me put your sister in her cradle and we will go inside together." As the family gathered for dinner that evening, crowded around the table Samuel had built with his own hands, Margaret looked at each face illuminated by lamplight. Her children, happy and healthy and loved. Her husband, strong and steady and true. Their home, filled with laughter and warmth. This was what she had been searching for all along without knowing it. Not adventure or excitement or grand promises. Just this. A good man who came home every evening. Children who felt safe and cherished. A home built on trust and genuine affection. Love that was demonstrated not just with words but with consistent actions over time. Samuel caught her eye across the table and smiled, and Margaret smiled back. No words were needed. They understood each other perfectly. He had promised to stay, and he had. Every single day he had chosen them. And she had learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in futures and promises and happy endings. After dinner, as they tucked the children into bed, William grabbed Samuel's hand. "Papa, tell us the story about how you met Mama." It had become a favorite bedtime tale, embellished over the years but true in all the important details. "Well," Samuel began, settling on the edge of the bed, "it was the coldest winter anyone could remember, and there was a brave mama and 3 children who needed help. Margaret listened from the doorway as Samuel told their story, and she felt tears prick her eyes. But they were good tears, happy tears, grateful tears. She had been abandoned with 3 children in winter, facing death and despair. And then a cowboy had brought firewood and said he would stay. And he had stayed, not just for a day or a week or a month, but forever. He had stayed through the hard times and the good times. He had stayed when she pushed him away out of fear and when she pulled him close out of love. He had stayed because that was who Samuel Xavier was. A man who kept his word. Later, after all the children were asleep, Samuel and Margaret prepared for bed. As they lay together in the darkness, Margaret rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what? For everything. For saving us, for loving us. For staying." Samuel's arms tightened around her. "There is nowhere else I would rather be. This is my home. You are my home. You and our children. I will stay here with you for the rest of my life." "I know," Margaret said, and she did know. She believed it with every fiber of her being. Samuel Xavier was a man of his word, and he had promised to stay. That promise had transformed her life from desperation to joy, from fear to trust, from loneliness to love. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, but inside, the house was warm and quiet and full of peace. 5 children slept safely in their beds. A good man and his wife lay together, their lives intertwined, their futures shared. And in every corner of the home they had built together, love lingered like the gentle glow of firelight. Margaret closed her eyes and let herself drift toward sleep, secure in the knowledge that when she woke, Samuel would still be there. He would be there tomorrow and the day after and all the days to come. Because he had said he would stay, and unlike some men, Samuel Xavier kept his promises. The story that had begun with abandonment and despair had become a story of rescue and redemption. But more than that, it had become a story of genuine, lasting love. The kind of love that showed up with firewood on the coldest day of winter. The kind of love that said, "I will stay," and actually meant it. The kind of love that built homes and families and futures one steady day at a time. And as Margaret drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, surrounded by her children, safe and warm and loved, she knew that she had finally found what she had been searching for all along. Not a grand adventure or an exciting romance, but something better and more enduring. She had found home. She had found family. She had found a love that would last forever. The cowboy had brought firewood. The cowboy had said he would stay. And the cowboy had kept his word, transforming a woman's darkest moment into the beginning of a beautiful life. It was a simple story, really. But it was their story, and it was perfect. Years later, when Margaret was older and the children were grown, people would sometimes ask her about her life. They would ask about the hard times, about being abandoned, about that terrible winter. And Margaret would smile and tell them yes, those times had been difficult. But she would also tell them about the cowboy who came with firewood, about the man who saw a need and filled it without expectation of reward, about how he kept showing up, day after day, proving through his actions that not all men break their promises. She would tell them about falling in love slowly, carefully, learning to trust again. About building a life and a family with a good man who knew the meaning of commitment. About children who grew up secure in the knowledge that their father would always be there. About a marriage built not on passion alone but on friendship and respect and genuine partnership. And then she would look at Samuel, still by her side after decades. His hair gray now, but his eyes still that same steady gray that had captivated her from the beginning. And she would take his hand, and he would squeeze back, and they would share a smile that spoke of years of shared memories and enduring love. Because he had stayed. Through everything, Through all the years and all the challenges and all the joys, Samuel Xavier had stayed. And in staying, he had given Margaret and her children the greatest gift possible. A love they could count on, a home they could trust, and a future they could believe in. It was, Margaret often thought, the happiest ending to a story that had begun in such darkness. But then again, the best love stories often started with a single act of kindness. A cowboy bringing firewood to a desperate woman and her children on a winter day. A simple gesture that changed everything. A promise to stay that was kept. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that? A love that stayed. A promise that held. A man who meant what he said and said what he meant. It was everything. It was enough. It was perfect. Margaret Xavier fell asleep that night as she did every night, grateful for the life she had been given. Grateful for the second chances and new beginnings. Grateful for children who were loved and safe. And most of all, grateful for a cowboy named Samuel Xavier who had brought firewood one winter day and said the 4 words that changed her life forever. "I will stay." And he had. God, how he had stayed. And in staying, he had given her the world.